Okay. Uh, Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, excellencies, official, distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Minister of Finance of Bhutan and the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, ESCAP, a warm welcome to this National Workshop of Bhutan, Rethinking MSME Finance, a post-crisis policy agenda jointly organized by the Minister of Finance of Bhutan and ESCAP. My name is Ishinendo, Senior Program Officer of Debt Management Division of Department of Macroeconomic Affairs, Minister of Finance of Bhutan, and it's my honor to serve you as the MC for today throughout this event. This workshop consists of 3 sessions with Q&A. Before we invite our keynote speaker to deliver their welcome speech and opening remarks, I would like to share a couple of housekeeping announcements. First, this workshop will be recorded, as you can see. And second, to ensure our internet connection remains stable and uninterrupted for everyone during the program, the organizer has kept your camera off and your microphone muted during the workshop. But when you are given the floor for your presentation or intervention, you will be access to your camera and microphone. With this note, I would like now to invite our keynote speaker for the opening session. First, I'm very pleased to invite Mr. Alberto Iscart, Acting Chief, Financing for Development Section, Macroeconomic Policy and Financing for Development Division, ESCAP, to deliver his welcome remarks. Mr. Iscart, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Her Excellency Dasho, Ms. Kesandeki, Finance Secretary, Ministry of Finance, distinguished participants, speakers, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the United Nations Economic Commission for Asia and the Pacific, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this workshop on Rethinking MSME Finance, a post-crisis policy agenda in Bhutan. The COVID pandemic has posed significant challenges worldwide and in Asia and the Pacific, and its cost has been considerable, whether measured in terms of public health or economic effects. To constrain the spread of coronavirus, national and local governments implemented measures such as lockdowns that restricted the flow of people, goods, and services, and this had acute consequences on businesses. While all businesses suffered in varying degrees from these measures, the most vulnerable were the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, or MSMEs. Because of their limited human and financial resources and heavy reliances on cash flows, MSMEs were generally less well equipped to cope with dramatic losses of business compared to larger firms. Access to finance, which has been traditionally a major constraint to MSME development, worsened considerably during the pandemic. MSMEs had a difficult time, even in countries where governments had sufficient resources to enact emergency policies and financial assistance aimed at keeping them afloat. The difficulties of the MSME sector during the pandemic are significant because of the important contribution they make to economic growth and job creation across Asia and the Pacific, where they represent over 90% of all businesses. Distinguished participants, the global initiative towards the post-COVID-19 resurgence and the MSME sector builds on a mandate by the General Assembly adopted in April 2020. Towards that mandate, the MSME Search Project aims to develop and implement capacity-building tools for governments and MSMEs to facilitate their resurgence and help mitigate the economic and social impact of the COVID-19 crisis. Within the framework of this project, ESCAP has set up an Asia-Pacific MSME policymakers network, which held its first 2 meetings in March 2021. The network consists of focal points from ESCAP's member states and serves as an experience sharing and coordination mechanism for MSME policymakers in the region. This work also builds on the MSME financing series developed by ESCAP since 2020 with the objective of publishing detailed national studies and cross-cutting studies on MSME financing in the region. In 2021, ESCAP has also published a book entitled Rethinking MSME Finance in Asia and the Pacific, a post-crisis policy agenda. This book identifies three important areas that policymaking for MSMEs need to address: digitalization and the rise of Fintech. Second, inclusion and the need for greater sustainability. And third, resilience and the need for more robustness. Understanding and responding effectively to the above trends necessitates a change in the strategic approach by both governments, agencies, and members of the international development community that support the development of MSMEs. On Fintech, in particular, it is important to leverage the potential gains to be derived from the latest advances in finance, but care needs to be taken to ensure that the inevitable risks entailed in any exploration of new innovations are kept within acceptable bounds. We hope that today's workshop will provide some valuable input to enhance the knowledge and capacity of the stakeholders on MSME development to foster a favorable ecosystem for financial inclusion and sustainability in Bhutan. The workshop also aims to enhance the resilience of MSMEs in Bhutan to mitigate economic and social impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and facilitate MSMEs' contributions to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Before concluding, I would like to stress that improving MSMEs' access to financing in any country can only be achieved through the adoption of strong collaborative efforts between all the involved stakeholders, which are well represented in this event. This said, I would like to thank the Ministry of Finance of Bhutan for co-organizing this event with us. And also, I would like to thank all of the participants in this important event. I look forward to a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Alberto, for delivering your welcome remarks. Now, I would like to invite Honorable Dasho Finance Secretary, Minister of Finance of Bhutan, for her opening remarks. Floor is yours, Dashula.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants in this Rethinking MSME Finance workshop. I would, Mr. Albert and other representatives from ESCAP, Mr. Nick Frickman, Mr. Mike Trollo, and participants, a very good morning or good evening to wherever you may be. It is indeed my pleasure and honor to be invited to give a few opening remarks on the special and important workshop on rethinking MSME finance, a post-crisis policy agenda in Bhutan. I remain deeply grateful and humble. On behalf of the Royal Government of Bhutan, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the officials of UN ESCAP for organizing this very important workshop, which is not only crucial but very timely to review our MSME financing policy and strategy, given our limited human and financial resources and heavy reliance on cash flows. While COVID-19 pandemic affected businesses of all sorts, we all will know very well that the most vulnerable were the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprise, which were generally less equipped to cope with the shocks as compared to others. Thus, the need to support and build back these critical sectors post-COVID-19 remains a priority for our country. Micro, small, and medium enterprises, or in Bhutan, as we call it, cottage and small industries, are the bedrock of our economic growth, and it contributes significantly to achieving the socio-economic development of our nation. In Bhutan, CSI constitutes over 95% of the total industries and employ over 90,000 people, including women and vulnerable section of the society. The cottage and small industries engage in diversified areas of production and manufacturing, services and contract businesses. Cognizant of the vital role of the CSI in the economy, the government has accorded high importance on the growth of the CSI sector in the recent years. CSI sector is identified as a flagship program with focused investments in the 12th five-year plan. The sector is also one of the 5 jewels of the Bhutanese economy, the other 4 being hydro, agriculture, tourism, and mining. Besides, the Department of Cottage and Small Scale Industry, which is the premier agency for promotion and development of CSI sector in the country, various agencies support the development of the CSI sector. We have the Ministry of Agriculture and Forest with their various schemes and incentives to promote renewable natural resources, associated cottage and small industry businesses, including development of farmers' groups and cooperatives, and capacity building of individuals and groups. Agency for Promotion of Indigenous Art Crafts facilitates the growth of craft sector, which comprises mainly of cottage industries, by creating a thriving crafts community that is economically rewarding and therefore sustainable. We also have the Bhutan Chamber of Commerce and Industry as the apex body of the private sector in the country, which supports business development by liaising with public sector, enhancing human resource capacities, and promoting business network with bilateral and multilateral organizations. We even have the Central Bank of Bhutan, Royal Monetary Authority, and the financial institutions supporting the promotion of economic activities in the CSI sector through provisions of micro loans in a rather impactful way under the priority sector lending, which recognizes cottage and small industries as a priority sector for targeted lending. Not only that, RMA came up with separate identified platform for startup business units, Japchor and Kenfin financing. The insurance companies, Royal Bhutan Insurance Corporation of Bhutan and the Bhutan Insurance Limited, have shared the risk of the CSI sector financing by underwriting insurance policies for the activities funded by the financial institutions under the PSL. Similarly, we have the Royal Security Exchange of Bhutan. They have introduced equity-based crowdfunding for startup businesses and donation-based crowdfunding. Under the government initiative, the Ministry of Finance has also established the National CSI Bank to support the growth of CSI sector by extending financial support at lower rates for startups and entrepreneurs, which otherwise face difficulty in availing loans from the other commercial banks. Similarly, the National Credit Guarantee Scheme has been introduced by the Ministry of Finance during the pandemic to issue guarantees to the participating banks, increase credit flows, especially to the cottage and small industries. Moreover, the Ministry of Finance, to help sustain and expand the businesses of cottage and small industries, has permitted various fiscal incentives, including tax exemption and tax concessionary rates. Further, the financial institutions lending to the CSI sector at preferential rates below the commercial borrowing rates are tax exempt on such incomes. These financial measures are expected to remove the supply side structural challenges in enhancing access to finance for CSI sector. In addition to these agencies, we also have various associations and cooperatives supplementing the efforts of the government in promoting the CSI sector in Bhutan. I am glad that all these agencies and more are represented today in the workshop. The efforts of these agencies, associations and cooperatives are channeled to alleviate the constraints and enhance the pace of development of the CSI sector through 6 strategic domains and entrepreneurship ecosystem of policy and legislative framework, entrepreneurship, culture and human capital development, business development support and infrastructure, enhancing access to finance and incentives, innovation and technology adoption, and access to market, which is the most important one. Despite these concerted efforts, the challenges of the CSI sector remain. constraints such as poor culture of entrepreneurship, limited human capacity, poor innovation and technology, limited access to market, inadequate business development support, and inadequate infrastructure continue to impede the sector from realizing its full potential. With their limited human and financial resources, the COVID-19 pandemic has also increased the challenges of the cottage and small-scale industries. In the 2 years of the global catastrophe, the number of cottage and small industries in Bhutan declined by about 8%, and the employment in the CSI sector also declined by about 10%. For the policymakers, the pandemic has helped identify and even pinpoint the weaknesses in the value chain and production networks of the cottage and small industries. So we are very fortunate to have the support of ESCAP to bring together the stakeholders in today's workshop, Rethinking MSME Finance, a post-crisis policy agenda, to meet and engage with international experts in the light of opportunity presented by the pandemic to build back better, so that the CSI sector is sustainable and resilient to such economic shocks. I am preempting that one of the outcomes of the workshop could be aligning the CSI financing measures with the post-pandemic recovery actions of the country. I look forward to it. I wish you all a successful and engaging workshop. Thank you, La. Over to you, Ishe.
Thank you very much, Honorable Dasho, for your very insightful opening remarks. So now I would like to invite for the first round of virtual photo session in presence of Dasho secretaries. Thank you.
Hello, Yeshe. This is Nick Frickman. Would you like me to start?
No, it's now first round for virtual photo session. So, Mr. Amir.
Yes, please. We just want to ask the presenters to turn on their cameras just for a second. Yeah. Thank
you. Yeshe, could you please? Yep, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dasho and Mr. Alberto, for your valuable and insightful opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Now we would like to move to the three main session for our today's program. All this session will be structured and conducted similarly. So for each session, we will have one presenter. After that, the floor will be open to the participant for question answers. If you would like to speak from the floor, you can raise your hand by using the raise hand features of MS Team, or you can write your questions or comments directly in the chat box. That should be available for everyone. During all our session, the presenter will use presentation file, and you will also be able to download all these share presentation files later from the ESCAP event website. Now, please let us proceed with the first session of our workshop. The theme of this session is session 1, Introduction to the Roles and Challenges of MSME Finance, the disruptive role of Fintech and other novel technology, which will be moderated by myself. To introduce the first presenter, Dr. Nick Frickman. Dr. Nick Frickman is an independent consultant specializing on MSME development and access to finance in the less developing and transitional economies of Asia. In this capacity, he has worked to the project in Bhutan, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. Clients have included the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, UNIDO, ILO, FCDO based in UK, USAID, DFAT in Australia, UNDP, and UNESCAP, among others. Currently based in California, Nick was resident in Vietnam from 2002 to 2013 and in Myanmar from 2013 to 2018. He has also lived and worked in the Thailand between 1996 to 1998 and Singapore to 1999 to 2000. Prior to becoming an independent consultant, Nick was an economist and equity research analyst for a leading investment bank focused on frontier and the emerging market, and a senior fellow at the Yusuf Ishaq Institute of Southeast Asia Studies in Singapore, where he remains an associate fellow. Nick is currently team leader of the multi-donor funded matching grant facility in Laos, and that is focused on supporting private sector development, where many of the chief constraints to CSI or MSME development are similar to those found in Bhutan. He has written and published extensive on the range of issues pertaining to this access to finance, private sectors and MSME development, and reforming the business enabling environment. So, Nick, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Yeshi, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for taking the time on this Monday morning to listen to these three presentations. I'm feeling slightly underdressed, seeing how wonderfully dressed the Minister, Her Excellency, is dressed, and all of you. My only excuse is it's Sunday evening. I've just returned from London, and these are my last pair of clean clothes. So I apologise if I look a little dishevelled. And I would like to add that I'm delighted and indeed very honoured to participate in this workshop. I have had the fortune to visit Bhutan on a number of occasions over the years, and have enjoyed myself immensely on every one of those trips. And so it's nice to be to remember my time there, if only virtually through this event. So thank you very much for the invitation. So if you move to the next slide, really what I'd like to do is just cover a small number of ways of looking at SME finance. If we could move to that next slide.
Nick, can you see it? The right slide?
No, I can only see the head slide.
Moving, but it seems it's not working.
Sorry, Mike, can Mike stop sharing?
Is it working now?
I'm afraid not.
Okay, maybe just a moment.
There we go. Well done. So really 5 little factors to cover the presentation. The first is to look a little bit about MSME finance and why it really matters, why we're having this conversation today. These are matters, these are issues that I think we're all very well familiar with, and I won't intend to spend very long. The next is to look at some of the principal challenges and constraints that we've faced in trying to meet the need of MSME finances for MSMEs for finance. And again, I think we're all pretty familiar with those challenges and constraints. Nonetheless, it's worth quickly just spanning over them. Section 3 looks at the advent of Fintech into the MSME finance space. And really what we're seeing is the potential for disruptions to the established way of doing things, and even some new unlocks, as I call them, new ways in which not only will MSME finance remove some of the past hurdles, but will open new opportunities. And I know that the speakers that follow me will be particularly focusing on some of those unlocks. The 4th section looks at what those challenges mean for regulators and policymakers. It's not going to be an easy time, I think, for the Ministry of Finance in Bhutan and other regulators and policymakers to keep up with those changes. That's going to be a challenge. And then finally, look at some concluding remarks, hopefully to leave us all feeling a little bit more optimistic than when I started, and quite excited about what might be coming in the next 3, 4, 5 years' time. Next slide, please. Okay, so why does it matter? I think I'm using, by the way, the word CSI and MSME as a collated term to describe what we all are familiar with as small companies. And they're typically the backbone of all economies. It doesn't matter whether you're Bhutan, America, somewhere in Europe, somewhere in Africa. Typically, MSMEs make up the vast majority of company registrations. If one was to try and run an economy without MSMEs and the sorts of inclusive and sustainable growth that they achieve, I think you'd probably be struggling quite a bit to do that. And that's true whether you're communist, whether your economy is an ardently capitalist one, or whether one is a strongly socialist-oriented economy, and everything in between. As I said, they pertain to developed countries, less developed countries, and industrialized countries. SMEs are a constant. They're always there. And it doesn't matter what kind of economy is overall, whether you're an intensive inland city-state like a Singapore or a Hong Kong, or a more landlocked agrarian state, a bit like Bhutan or some of the work I'm doing in Laos. Again, MSMEs really are the backbone of the economy. And yet, when you talk to MSMEs and you poll them and you ask them what they think, typically access to finance is one of the top 3 problems that they will cite. I think in normal times it will probably be the top 1 factor, and then maybe when there are other incidents going on that serve as a bit of a distraction, they may be the top 3. But anyway, nonetheless, access to finance is a perennial, constant criticism that MSMEs face. They simply just do not have access to the finance they want. And that's not only the amount of finance they want, but the kinds of finance they want. And again, it doesn't matter whether you're a formalized business, whether you're informal, whether you're a business that is family owned, probably for many generations, and really all you're interested in is continuing that legacy, or whether you're a new startup, what they call a disruptor, where you've got a new product or a new service and you're trying to roll that out. Again, typically you will talk about the fact that you have insufficient access to finance to scale up or to keep going. It doesn't matter what size of company you are, whether from a medium firm to a small firm, or even now the increasing penchant, the increasing trend towards what they call gig workers, where people are one man or one woman businesses. You have no employer, you employ yourself. Again, MSME finance will be an issue, and it's across the majority of business sectors where you find MSMEs. So particularly in services, in trading, in agribusiness, if you're a smallholder farmer, there are relatively few sectors, unless you're an airline or a large steel conglomerate, you will find MSMEs talking about their lack of access to finance. And really any attempt to improve the socioeconomic well-being of a country, and in the very specific case of Bhutan, the gross national happiness objective, then it would be rather difficult to go about having a vibrant MSME sector at the same time. And one of the things Bhutan has done recently, as you know, is set up a national CSI development bank in pursuit of those objectives. Next slide, please. So what are the principal challenges and constraints that one finds in improving access to finance? If MSMEs are so important, and then within that access to finance to support them is so important, how can we struggle so much to address those challenges and constraints? Typically, when you talk about those challenges and constraints, you talk about them as market failure issues. The market is not doing its job. For some reason, the market is unable to meet up MSMEs on one side, the demand side of the equation, to meet up with the supply side, which is the access to finance. Tend to be on both the supply SME side and the demand side, let's call it the bank side of that marketplace, that equation. Although increasingly you see greater emphasis placed on the former, on the bank side, the supply side. The banks are not the best at providing finance. And the question is often asked, why don't banks lend more to SMEs? Unless so, why do SMEs make themselves less well positioned for bankers? So you see a series of policy interventions, and this is something that all of us have been doing over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years to try and focus on those gaps, come up with interventions that plug those gaps in MSME finance, or at least take off some of the rough edges of those gaps, of those market failures. So it could be about one of the biggest problems that you face is a company knows an awful lot about a company, its own company. Banks know less of it, and banks, what they don't know scares them, so they stay away. They call it information asymmetry. The banks are worried to lend to a company because they don't know what dark secrets they might be hiding behind the loan application, and therefore choose not to loan. Another could be reducing the transaction and operational costs of lending to those MSMEs. It is far cheaper to give a loan of $1 million to a large company, which you can afford to go in and check and make sure the books are all straight and everything's okay, versus giving out $1,000 loans. If you're a bank manager, which one would you pick? The $1 million loan that costs one transaction, or give out 1,000 loans, which is 1,000 transaction checks? It's a bit of a no-brainer. You'll go for the bigger one. So all these sorts of problems and failures that the market is unable to address means that we all try to find ways to plug those gaps, and thereby help to ensure that MSMEs are better able to access the finance they need. And the menu of interventions that we've all been trying over the last 5 to 10 years are sort of like sticking plasters. They're temporary attempts to try and cover up the problem. One can be for a ministry or a state bank or some other government institution to provide some sort of guarantee mechanism, either one-on-one with each loan, or a guarantee mechanism across a whole bank that says, look, please lend to SMEs. If the bank, end up incurring losses, then we will guarantee those losses up to a certain level. Another could be trying to introduce a credit scoring mechanism, which directly attacks the information asymmetry issue. The idea is that you set up a simple one-stop way of scoring MSMEs that come to you. You give them a score. If the score is high enough, you give them a loan. If it's too low, you reject them. You can provide quota systems or conditionalities So you can say, particularly to central-owned banks, hey, look, as long you have to lend a certain percentage of all your loan portfolio to SMEs, and if you don't, then you will get into trouble with your license. You can provide, if you're a monetary authority, you could provide targeted funding. So you provide liquidity to certain banks and say, hey, here's some extra liquidity, here's some extra money, but you must lend it to SMEs. There's also other sorts of instruments looking at things like leasing and other activities or factoring, which are deliberately financial instruments that are particular of assistance to MSMEs, ways of moving around. Another constraint that we often talk about, MSMEs are often very keen to have access to finance, but they lack the security or lending or the collateral needed to secure that loan. So you find ways to move around that collateral problem, such as cash flow lending. But again, that requires a new set of skills from your credit officers to move from value the price of a collateral, an asset, to actually looking at a forward cash flow of a company and making some sort of decision about whether that company is creditworthy and will be able to honor its future loans. Another way, as Bhutan has attempted, is to set up what we call policy banks, and that is a bank deliberately intended to address a particular problem. The fallback, the downside of going that way is, of course, by introducing a new bank, you're letting other banks off the hook, and you're also sort of implying that the existing banking system doesn't work, and therefore you're having to introduce a new bank to try and plug the hole. And as anyone knows, setting up a new bank is an expensive exercise. And so you have to, make a serious commitment to doing that. Plus then, of course, you have lots of development partners who will be around able to provide different types of technical assistance. And again, that can be another way. So all these are different ways of trying to plug the gap, but they are ways of plugging a gap rather than trying to fix the gap. They are sort of, as I said, sticking plaster measures. Next slide, please. So as I said, as a result of all those wonderful measures, all of which are commendable, all of which have value, I think ultimately, if we were to stand back, we would have to say that there have been mixed successes. Some of those activities have been quite successful in some countries, and in other countries maybe less so. And I think one of the key reasons for that is that all those interventions I talked about, I particularly talked about policy banks, but it's true for all of those interventions, is none of them are free. They all come with a cost, and that cost has to be borne by somebody. The underwriting of that cost can be unsustainable. It might be possible for a year or two, but in the long term, particularly for less developed and developing countries, that can be quite costly for a government. So an affluent country like Japan or Germany, which is well known for its work in supporting SMEs, they can afford to do that for many years. It's less easy, perhaps, for a less developed country, say Bhutan, Nepal, India, to do that on a more long-term basis. And as long as it's not long-term, people will always worry that, oh, okay, that policy is around today, but will it be around tomorrow? And that adds to people's worry about levels of trust and whether you can rely on that thing to be around in the future. The other factor is, of course, what you're trying to do. Often there's a criticism said, oh, a certain activity is distortionary. It distorts the market. But to be very honest with you, all interventions are, by their very nature, deliberately distortionary. You're trying to distort the market. You're trying to create change. And distortions, therefore, desirable distortions are good things. But what about those distortions that perhaps are less good things? Maybe not foreseen, maybe unwelcome, maybe things that that you would not like to see. So, for example, issues of moral hazard. If an SME bank knows that at the end of the day, a government guarantee will bail out any losses, does that mean that the bank will then be a little bit more cavalier, a little bit more relaxed about checking on the creditworthiness of a bank, and therefore be more happy to accrue losses, knowing that the government will bail them out? And when I mean government, I mean the taxpayer. I also talked about policy banks and the issue of whether policy banks are a good thing, or whether actually what you're doing in the long term is you're undercutting the same banking sector that you're trying to build up over time. So there's a kind of a cost bank. If you ask MSMEs, they kind of understand this on some level, and they will say, well, look, we're not asking for privileged access. We're not looking for special treatment. We're not looking for anything more than anyone else has got. We just want a playing field, a level playing field, the same as the big boys. But it's not as simple as that, as you can ask any credit officer. And I go back to those transaction costs of, do you do one loan or do you do 1,000? Because the cost of doing one loan is far smaller than the cost of doing 1,000. MSMEs will often say also they want lower interest rates. It's a sort of extension of that thing about not wanting privileged access, but they don't want to have to pay more interest than a big boy. But maybe they don't really appreciate, and why should they, how those interest rates are arrived at in the first place, and issues around the concept of pricing for risk. In other words, if the risk of lending to an MSME is higher, then that has to be reflected in a higher interest rate. I mean, that's just the way it is. And also the cost of funds that banks and financiers pay. Banks and financiers don't dream up the interest rate. It really is the result of how much they can access funding. And then they have to put on top of that something to cover their profits, to cover their provisioning for loans. And so those interest rates that are charged are not simply a number pulled out of the air magically. They are driven by factors beyond the banker's control. And then finally, of course, with any system or any market, on both sides, you will see actors trying to, what I call, game the system, see ways in which they can gain an advantage over the other one. And that generally adds to a level of, I wouldn't say distrust, but it doesn't help with the level of trust. And again, once trust is heightened, risk is heightened, and again, that feeds through into higher interest rates. Next slide, please. So I think a lot has been said about fintech as a way to transform the market, and I certainly would not want you to think that, oh, Nick is a dreamer. Nick is someone who believes in fintech and is the magic bullet that will save us all. It isn't, but it is something new, and I think it is something that has the potential to be useful in addressing some of those constraints and being more than just that band-aid. And I also concede as well as that it brings about new challenges, particularly for regulators and policymakers, and also those bankers who are already what we call vested interest. It's not a golden bullet, but it could be a new quiver of arrows, as I put it. And as we all know, the Bhutanese are the best users of arrows, I think, in the world. And so I think that idea of an arrow is perhaps a useful one here. And by a quick word on fintech, I'm certainly not referring to the more high-techy stuff. I'm not talking about things like cryptocurrencies, blockchains, alternative AI, Internet of Things, the metaverse, that really sort of far end fintech. I think that's somewhere down the road for us. But what I am thinking of is, and I've got a definition here in the middle paragraph, sort of new tech that seeks to improve and automate the delivery and use of financial services. And at its core, fintech is utilized to help companies, business owners and consumers better manage their financial operations, their processes, using specialized software and algorithms that are used on computers and increasingly on smartphones, and smartphones in particular. And I think this is where that's the zone in which I guess I'm talking here today. I think it's a sort of tech-driven new field, and I think it has some opportunities for us in that it can help us with some of those problems that we faced in the past. But I mean, and it's not inclusive to fintech. That's the other thing I would say. It's sort of, you can put any word in front of tech. I think we're seeing it across a range of services, everything from ed tech to you name it tech, reg tech, insurance tech. It's something, it's not exclusive to fintech, but we're all going in that direction, so it's a trend, but for the focus of today, it's about fintech. Next slide, please. And one of the things it's doing, and this was something in the book that was mentioned at the top by Yeshi very, very, very kindly, because it's happening in all these different areas, this move to tech, and fintech is only one, it means that fintech is sort of getting embedded in all those other services. And that sort of protective moat that used to exist between an MSME and his or her banker is now sort of being, well, more than bridged, it's being integrated into a wide range of other services. And arguably those services are probably in a better position than the bank manager to provide the MSME finance. So if you look on the left-hand graphic, what you see there's the MSME in the middle, and you can see it has this relationship with its human resources people, with its logistics people. So it's human resources people to hire its staff, its logistics people to get its products to its customers, the inputs and suppliers it needs to make whatever it makes, the sales and marketing team to distribute to the marketplace what it does. So you had all these different relationships, and then exclusive to that relationship was this one-on-one relationship at the bottom with its banker, its financier, and this was kind of separate from everything else. In order for the business to run, it had this one-on-one relationship with its bank manager, who would hopefully then give it money. And without that money, the company was in dire straits. And what you've moved to now is the picture on the right, where suddenly the provision of that finance to help it run is now getting embedded in all those other relationships. It's no longer exclusively with the bank manager. It will talk to its different suppliers, its different, its marketplace. For example, if you're an MSME and you're selling your product through a marketplace, that marketplace probably knows more about your MSME as you do. So that issue of information asymmetry, that previously, before that dysfunctional relationship that the MSME had with its bank manager, where the bank manager didn't really trust the set of books it was being given, didn't really trust what the MSME was telling, well, suddenly now that marketplace is able to verify that information. They know a ton of things that the bank manager never knew. And all it needs is for those service providers, that marketplace, to be able to also, through a relationship with some finance provider, to be able to provide those dollars. Suddenly the bank manager is not the only game in town. The MSME doesn't need the bank manager in order to get the dollars for the things that it wants to do. There are other places it can go for that finance. If you're exporting a product, then somebody else knows whether indeed it's true that you are exporting, you are a going concern, you do have cash flow, you are cash flow positive, and therefore you are a good borrower. So suddenly the banker is not this sort of be all and end all exclusive person. There are other ways for an MSME to get its finance. This is not to say banks will suddenly disappear overnight. They won't, but they're going to have to change their way they work. They're going to have to find a new role for themselves, a new value in order to stay in the game. Otherwise, they will become kind of irrelevant because MSMEs will be sourcing their finance from somewhere else. I won't go on about that because maybe that's something you'd like to discuss, but that's kind of my feeling. We're going towards what we call embedded finance, or what we called in the book the ENSO of MSME finance. And I know Mike Troilo will pick up on this a little bit later on. If we can move to the next slide, please. I mean, as I said, I don't think this is exclusive to MSME finance. I think you're going to find this move towards digitization run across all types of services. And the other thing I'd like to say is this is not sort of magically appeared because of the pandemic. All of this was going on before the pandemic. But what's happened is the pandemic has accelerated these processes. Whilst we've all been struggling to stay alive and we're all tired and we're all beaten up and the pandemic has been horrible, for the fintech people, what they thought would probably take 3 to 5 years has happened in 6 months. They've been able to go like crazy. And so a sort of digital revolution is sort of breaking down a lot of those silos that we were used to before the pandemic. I mean, if part of this discussion for this workshop is about building back better after the pandemic, this is going to be part of the story. It's not all the story, but it's going to be part of the story. We're going to move to a different way in which MSMEs are financed. And it's not only about being able to integrate MSME finance with other types of things that MSMEs need, whether they're input supplies, whether they're markets for their customers, whatever it is. It's also going to mean that there's going to be new linkages with things like green finance, about tackling change. And this is something where I think Bhutan can play a massive role because of its carbon footprint. I think it's going to mean changes about gender and inclusion, marginalized communities, and we all know that Bhutan, is spread over a large distance. You're not any longer going to need a branch in every town. All you're going to need is a relatively basic smartphone, and suddenly MSME finance will become available. I think you're going to see it around ESG, which since COP26 has really taken off big time. And I think you're also going to be able to see it within the context of G&H. But I'm going to leave those because I know Mike in particular will want to touch on those. But the point, all I'm trying to make is suddenly we're now starting to see no longer MSME finance as a separate, independent thing and everything else is, not part of it. It's all going to start coming together. The fintech is going to allow the merging of all these things together. I'm almost at an end. Just another slide, couple of slides, please. just next slide, please. This is just an example. This is Singapore. This is Singapore alone. No, it's not. This is all the global, what they call unicorns. A unicorn is a company valued at over 1,000 billion. This are all the unicorns as of this year existing. And as you can see, Fintech is by far the biggest subsection of all the unicorns in the world. They're the ones in the center. There is a ton of things going on. It's not obscure anymore. This is not some small part of the Fintech story. It is the Fintech story. Fintech is huge. Not all these companies will survive. A lot of them will be eaten up by each other. But the point to make here is Fintech is really taking off. It's going to be big news. And if we move to the next slide, this is Singapore alone. There are almost 500 Fintech startups in Singapore alone. Again, again, a lot of these will get eaten. A lot of them won't make it. A lot of them will not survive. But with that number of companies in one city-state of, what, 7 million people, you can't write this off as just some sort of, trend. Something is going on here. And it's something that we all need to be aware of. And Fintech knows no borders. What happens in Singapore can happen anywhere. And I think that's very important. Just to conclude on, if we move to the next slide, in fact, we can pass on the next slide. It just shows a breakdown of Fintech in Singapore. You can see it covers a range of things. So if we move to challenges of all of that, ignore that slide, please. Yeah, thank you. I think the one thing I would say is that doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. It doesn't mean that Bhutan should throw its hand up in the air, that the RMA should say, hey, it's coming. There's nothing we can do about it. It's huge. Of course, it needs to be regulated. Absolutely. There's a reason why banking and finance is regulated around the world in every country. It is super important. It's got to be done right. If you don't do it right, you will have systemic crisis and things will go badly wrong very quickly. So really the challenge is, well, if Fintech's coming and it is the future of finance, regulators need to keep on top of this. The problem then is, how do you regulate for something that's moving so fast? These paces of change in Fintech are moving so fast. Business may have moved slowly during the pandemic, but as we discussed, the process of change in Fintech is moving rapidly. And that means that we need to find ways of keeping up with that. And sandboxing is, of course, one way in which we can do that. One way we can square the circle, some way in which we can see what people are doing, see how they're innovating, see what works we allow to go ahead, but we regulate for it, see what doesn't work, we throw in the bin. So as much as it sounds easy, I think Fintech is the way to go. But I think in terms of, if you move to the next slide, it's not something that Bhutan needs to move alone with. It can work with other countries. It can find ways, see what works in Singapore, see what works in Vietnam, see what works in India, adapt it to meet the specificities of the Bhutan's own cultural and economic desires, make sure it's compliant with GNH. But I definitely think this is an area where Bhutan doesn't need to reinvent the wheel, but can take on the best ideas from around Asia and make them their own. And I really think that if one thing is the GNH has taught us is that there was a time of, the world moved closer to GNH. We realized that what Bhutan was advocating in terms of GNH was hugely valuable. What we were doing before around the world was not sustainable. This dash for growth was not working. It was just creating problems, that this cult of innovation wasn't working. But now GNH is putting up an agenda about how we can lead a more sustainable life. And I think Bhutan can be at the lead of that in key areas, and maybe SME finance is one of those key areas where Bhutan can really, you know, lead the way. And I will end on one final slide, please, which is that in a sense, it's going to mean a mindset change. We're moving away from the idea of MSME finance being about money and more about being about data. It's about thinking about it's talking about MSME finance, not through financial intermediators, not through banks, or at least not exclusively through banks, but looking at other providers of MSME finance. And that means moving towards embedded finance. That gets tricky. It's harder for regulators, but at the end of the day, it means that MSMEs will get the financing they need, not the financing that banks and regulators roll out and say, here you go, this is what we've got, we hope it fits. If it doesn't fit, well, bad luck, but here's something that really works for you, that's going to meet your needs. The tech will allow them to design things that are exclusive to what they need. Banks are not going to go away. They shouldn't feel threatened by SME finance. What they need to do is find a way of pivoting so that they are able to be part of this new fintech embedded finance story. And I know I've taken up far too much time, so I will stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Nick, for your very insightful and very interesting presentation, where you have touched upon all from the starting from challenges, key issues, then also on the digital front, not on the very much on the high five of the fintech these things, but making the SMEs financing very digital for easy accessing and for making it very efficiency by reaching out to the outreach and to leverage on the digitization of the SMEs out of this technology. So with this, I would like to now welcome the questions from the floor. Before that, there is one question from the Mr. Rakesh, the president of PAYUL, Bhutan Association of Enterprise. So his question seems to be on the support that is tracking with the government beside the access of finance. What I understood from his question is much like the elsewhere, CSI are the growth engine of Bhutanese economy. They employ the largest number of the people after the agriculture sectors and represent 95% of the industry unit. The CSI sector also generates about 100,000 employment opportunities in the country. Considering the important role that CIC play in the driving economies, government and the world implement policy to support them in the hope that they will grow into large, successful form. One will be the government supports CSI directly in purchase preferences procurement, creating demand for their products and providing them with the concession terms for securing government orders. Moreover, CSI perpetuate any economic multiplier effect, strengthen local supply chains and local economy. So his question is very interesting and very relevant. If we compare to, if I bring the example of the Japan, their government support is that they give a preferential treatment to their local products and their local industries, though their prices seems to be very skyrocketing, whatever it may be. They always try to give a preference to their domestic, and especially the Indian economy seems also in that style only. So from that perspective, I think our government has to revisit in our procurement kind of indirectly. What he indicates is our government needs to revisit our procurement kind of things like bidding and all those things to pay more importance on the CSI products and all those things. That is what I understood. I think the relevant stakeholder, especially the Ministry of Economic Affairs, where they are the lead agency in terms of CSI, and also not that others ministers are not important, but they are also playing equally role. But since their coordination start from there, I think Ministry of Economics is already going so many initiatives and on this front of CSI, where because they are bringing now, they have already identified like CSI is one of the key driver for our 13-year plans in next few years. So from that angle, I think definitely government will revisit on all those things issue. And as I said, they have already introduced flagships program and all those things on this front. So definitely there will be some big or the drastic transformation on these CSI products, ordering and all those preferential treatment, definitely. Then with regard to these, with regard to the Nick's presentation on the digital front, government is also already into the move, like for in the digitalization, like applying the licensing registrations, then for the paying of taxes, whatever it may. Now they are all streamlining, bringing into the digitization, then to the conventional manner, visiting physically and all those things in the past. From that perspective, we have a both, I think, benefits, both the side of the coin in these type of things, like benefit as well as negative as well. So benefit seems like efficiency and reaching out to the very fast, and especially from the pandemic lesson, we have learned that in order to have a seamless operation and all those things, digitization's way of working seems to be very much effective than that of the physical form. So from that angle, and on the negative side, if we too much rely on the digitization, there is also a structural unemployment issues and all those things. So in that case, how is structural transformation issue can be addressed with this digitization move? If Nick could touch upon on these things to address.
Sure. I mean, I guess any sort of change in technology brings about a shift in employment patterns, and there will people who will feel threatened by the notion that their jobs will be made redundant by those advances. I mean, in a sense, we're talking about MSME finance, how it will benefit MSMEs today, but of course that's only a very, focused part of the discussion. There are certainly ways in which programs can be initiated to generate jobs and opportunities for those made redundant by a move to MSME finance. I mean, one example would be, and I don't know enough about Bhutan these days to know what its stand is on areas around cryptocurrency and blockchain, but with the banning of crypto mining and trading in China, you've seen a large movement of those activities to countries nearby where there is a plentiful resources of power that allows for the relocation of that sort of crypto mining. It could well be that becomes a growth sector for Myanmar, utilizing the plentiful hydro resources it has. I mean, if Myanmar was to come up with a zero carbon means of generating cryptocurrencies, I would imagine it would enjoy a premium far greater than that of other cryptocurrencies. So, like I said, it's not a golden bullet. It doesn't solve all problems overnight, but in terms of giving MSMEs the financial resources they need to scale up, and if they scale up, they'll of course be hiring, and again they will start creating jobs. Maybe that's less desirable for individuals who worked for quasi-governmental banks who enjoy working for the government and do not enjoy working for a private sector company for all sorts of understandable reasons. But it would be unfortunate if Bhutan held itself back from availing itself of these resources and these opportunities because there was a relatively modest number of people who were worried about their jobs.
Thank you for your these things, and thank you for your great this explanation. So now I think Ms. Chimi has come with one question, like, we are facing market problem as our local products are ignoring most probably on this ground. We local manufacturers and producers are discouraging direct or indirectly. So expecting solution from this workshop. So what's your this on this front, on this question, Nick?
I'm just reading the question again. I mean, I guess there are many ways that perhaps, you know, MSMEs have not been able to get going in Laos because they've not been able to access finance, and so there has been a dependence on importing as the only alternative. So it would be nice to see if MSMEs were encouraged to start, you know, moving into areas where they could import substitute. I mean, that would be one field. I'm not sure it's sort of fair to conflate the issues of the fact that Bhutanese products are not adequately demanded by overseas markets with the issue of MSME finance. They tend to be two sort of issues, but nonetheless, you know, it would be good if with greater financial resources, MSMEs in Bhutan were able to put on a more convincing ability to penetrate overseas markets, simply because they have more resources at hand. It meant they could buy improved machinery. It meant they could pay more skilled workers. Maybe skilled workers who had left to other countries would return because the salaries became more competitive. It tends to be a bit of a package deal. Yeah, it's a hard one to answer. I mean, it doesn't mean it's not a good question. It's a very good question. I just struggle to know how to sort of in 2 minutes, you know, come up with a very strong argument as to how you would resolve those two, you know, those two factors. I mean, another way could also be that in providing improved sources of finance, I mean, any form of trade requires a transaction involved, right? No one sells for free. You sell a product in order to get paid. So if there are better ways in which companies or more easily can get paid, then they may be more willing to take executive risks about exporting and look at exporting to a wider range of markets. I mean, Bhutan is in a unique position. It's not trying to sell, you know, 1 million cars a day. It's not trying to, you know, push large amounts of product. You know, the answer to Bhutan's trade challenges will be about high niche products. So if the skills are there to produce products that are of a very high niche, that at least a small number of people are willing to pay a high price for, and have an ability to pay for it. It's not a case of writing a check and putting it in the post, but they can with great confidence buy that order through a trading market. Then they will be more likely to do so. So in a sense, at that point, finance becomes part of the value proposition.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. By the way, we have so many questions are flying in the chat box, and some of the colleagues from the relevant agency, especially from Ministry of Economic Affairs, Sir Kinzang is kind enough to respond some of the things on the Rikish concern and Madam Chimidem concern to supplement on the Nick. So we welcome your questions. Keep shooting there. So we'll try to take as much as possible. Although with the limited time, if we can't answer at the moment, we'll definitely capture in the next, like in the through the ESCAP website or in our report and all those things. So please, and then in the interest of time, there's one last question we could take from Mr. Tille Doji. If you could speak out loud.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Tille Doji. I'm from Royal Insurance Corporation of Bhutan. I'm heading the credit department. I don't have a question, but then I want to add some points that most people, most of the audience, they have raised. In the presentation made by Mr. Nick, there was a statement saying that why banks are not lending to us. I just want to briefly touch on that. I think all this MSME, it is not that financial service providers in Bhutan, it is not that they do not want to give financial assistance to this CSI firms, because there is not enough sort of a guarantee from other stakeholders. So since financial issues, most of the financial service providers, they are funded by their own shareholders. So what financial service providers have is they are responsible and they are accountable for their public fund. So I think they don't want to lose money. If there is enough guarantee from government or any other stakeholder, I think all financial service providers, they want to give financial assistance to all this MSME. And I think in the interest of time, I'll make it short. Then there was one member raising that a lot of digitalization may cut down the employment, so people are fearing that. I think yes, on the direct form, if you do a lot, but yes, there's some manpower cut down. But then I think for the entrepreneur, it is better for him if service is delivered to him efficiently with the less number of people. But then at the same time, we are not cutting down because there are other partners, other players who are getting sort of employed through such by providing such services. Then on the marketing, specifically in Bhutan, I see a lot of small cottage and this industries coming up in the different parts of the country, but then they do not have enough information and where to deliver this. I think not only on the entrepreneurs, but I think here the importance is all the stakeholders, be government, from the financial service providers. I think they should be collaborating together to help these entrepreneurs come up. So if once they are in a full-fledged, I think, and if other players are also there, then there can be any middle person, or there can be any other firm who can again do this marketing as professionally by themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Tilisa.
I agree.
Thank you, Tilisa, for your constructive comments and suggestions and all those things. So we take note of it and definitely will revisit your comments and all those things. So now, in the interest of time, I would like to now jump into the next session. And before that, I would like to request all the participants keep shooting your questions or comment, whatever it may be. Although we can't address at the moment, we'll try to take this matter very seriously, and we'll try to bring in our report and all those things to recommend to our higher authorities. So now, on the second session, we have financing for SME cluster in Bhutan. So I would like to invite Mr. Jit Badguru, Senior Information Officer for Policy Planning of Ministry of Economic Affairs, to moderate the session. Floor is yours.
Hello. Hello. Good morning. And Kazan Deki, Secretary, Ministry of Finance, Alberto Scott, Acting Chief, Financing for Development Section, ESCAP, esteemed speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Let me welcome you to the session, Financing for MSME Clusters in Bhutan. As we all know, the MSME in Bhutan have been worse hit because of the global COVID-19 pandemic, and this has provided opportunities for the policymakers to think how to come up with interventions to develop MSME in the country. And we also know that, as it was highlighted in the presentation, that MSME are the backbone of the economy for socio-economic development of the country. Just briefly introduce this session. This session will focus on the financing status of MSME clusters in Bhutan for the development as a major contributor to the special economic zones, export processing zones, industrial estates, and high-tech parks. The session also further elaborates on the existing business development services for the MSME clusters, such as mentorships, logistics, and industrial utilities. And to present on financing for MSME clusters in Bhutan, we have Mr. Rinchen Dorji, Deputy Chief Program Officer from Department of Macroeconomic Affairs, Ministry of Finance. With this, let me invite Mr. Rinchen to talk on financing for MSME clusters in Bhutan, and the floor is yours.
Hello. Good morning. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Great. Maybe if Amu or some organizers could please let me share my screen. I'm not able, I don't have the access to share my screen right now. So could you please help me with that one? Amir or maybe Ishe?
I think you already have, yeah? Can you share now?
No, I don't have the access to share my screen.
Let me check with my colleague Prani. Could you please check on that? Or quickly you can. Okay.
You click on the chair.
Yep, I'm there, but I'm not able to share my screen.
Or you can send quickly to our email, to me or to Luciana. We can use our own screen for you.
Okay, we could do that as well. Let me just show you then. Okay. In the meantime, I think there is one participant called Mr. Sonam Doji. His hand is still on rise, so if he has any very interesting, I think seems he has got very interesting question or comment, so if he can speak out.
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Actually, my concern is to just share on what Mr. Thiledoji said, because how he was insisting on how bank usually functions, but with my recent experience, I just wanted to share the experience. In Bhutan, I heard some banks are running out of client, or they have excess money where it indicates there are no lenders. While across the border in Jaigong and Siliguri, they facilitate our retailers with some credit facilities. Now, if our government could facilitate the same with our wholesalers and all, we can have an organized market, as well as our bank could benefit a lot. Why I'm saying this is because most of the retailers, they are given about a 1 month or 2 months credit by the wholesalers from India, where they are also being supported by their own local banks with some interest. And I have come to know that whatever the banks charge is almost half or 1/3 than what is being charged by the wholesalers from India, because they take advantage on that and they charge 5 to 10% extra. And to my calculation, our Bhutanese banks has been losing a lot, and our country in general has been losing. So in that case, I feel it's not just about the secured loans. If there could be spaces or a platform where we can explore, where we can finance unsecured loans to our retailers. So I feel many of with the development and with presence of IT and technologies, we can get in touch with the more reliable and relevant wholesalers or manufacturers, and borrow the money from the local bank and make use of them, instead of letting the neighboring, I mean, the companies from India do that, and we entire Bhutanese people landing up pay extra money for that. Thank you. I hope I'm clear.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. So bringing this but very serious and concerning issues here, lah. So seems sir is sir brought up very this informal and formal business happening in the cross-border side. So definitely we'll take this matter to our higher authority, and we'll get it done on this thing, lah. Last, thank you, lah. If you could put your hands down in the thing, lah, Sasono.
Hello, Rinchen sir. Is the presentation ready?
Yep, I've just emailed the presentation to the organizers, to the ESCAP rep. They should be putting it up anytime soon.
Rinchen, I think your screen can be seen now. Hello, Rinchen. Hi, Rinchen.
Hello.
We can see your presentation from your screen now.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are. Thank you.
Great. Apologies for the technical glitches. I'm Rinche Doji. I work for the macroeconomic department with the Ministry of Finance. The purpose of this session is more to stock take of the challenges that we have, so that in our building back better days to come, we should be at least solving some of the challenges that the CSI sector has long been facing in the country. So it's more on cluster financing, and clusters are the interconnected businesses that are concentrated in particular areas, could be geographic for that matter, that are associated institutions. So ultimately, the objective is to increase their productivity. And as we will see, we do quite have a lot of CSI clusters in the country. The MSME, or in Bhutan we call the CSI, the cottage and small industries. Setting the context for this session, we classify, or rather define, our CSI by investment size mainly. So the cottage industries are those with investment up to 1 million and may employ up to 4 people. The small industries invest anywhere between 1 million to 10 million and may engage between 5 and 19 people. So the CI sector, as we heard in the opening remarks and also from a few of the participants, it accounts for over 90% of total industries in Bhutan in terms of numbers. And looking at their employment, well, up until the COVID pandemic, they were engaging up to close to 100,000 people. In terms of categorization, within the CSI sector, we are looking at contract, production and manufacturing, and service. Majority of the CSI sector has always been the service sector. As of now, it accounts for almost 73% of the total CSI industry, CSI firms. The share has pretty much been the same, maybe plus minus 1-2% for the last 5 years or so. Within these subcategories, there's high density of a few industries. For example, in the service sector, it's predominantly the restaurants and bars that make up over close to 40-50% of the service industry. And in the production manufacturing, it's mostly the furniture units. Now, the contributions, more to say the general contributions of the CSI sector in any economy. Obviously, first is the economic development, then we have the employment creation, and in our industry, we are looking at about 5 people employed by one CSI. Because of the diversification, CSI also presents the opportunity to broaden our economy base, and also because the CSIs are rather easy to set up, also do not require much of investments to start with. These are scattered, or more say spread across the country, thereby contributing to the balanced regional development, which has been one of the auxiliary objectives of our development. On reducing part, the CSIs also the because the CSIs are rather rural based. They also help in reducing poverty. Poverty in Bhutan, as you know, is a rural phenomenon. The CSI also mostly engages the women entrepreneurs more than any other sector, and thereby CSI development also contributes to gender equity. For example, we are looking at women ownership of over 44% of CSIs. And in terms of workforce, the CSI employ about 32% of the total CSI workforce. In terms of economic development, we are yet to account the CSI contribution to the economy in terms of percentage of GDP. The work is undertaken by the Minister of Economic Affairs and the National Statistics Bureau. For now, the work is on hold because of the pandemic. And in the absence of the baseline, the recently conducted survey would not accurately reflect the activities of the CI. So, pending the recovery of the economy, our contribution, the CSI's contribution to the economy in terms of GDP is yet to be determined. However, more than the contributions, or so to say, weighing the contributions vis-a-vis the challenges, is quite a lot to take in. The lack of economies of scale, outdated technology, the inadequate access to finance, deficiencies in corporate governance, our poor culture of entrepreneurship, limited human capacity, market access, limited infrastructure, business development services, innovation, low productivity level. And these issues are similar across countries, and then the issues mostly they predate the pandemic. What the COVID-19 has done is it has only given greater emphasis on the issues. So, recognizing the contributions of the CSI, there has been special focus on CSI development in the recent years, especially since the last decade. Is one of our economic jewels. The other four being hydrology, agriculture, tourism, and mining. In the 12th five-year plan, the CSI sector is also a priority program, meaning it would have focused investment of nearly 1.2 million in the 5 years. The CSI policy sort of approaches these challenges in 6 domains of policy and legislative framework: the culture of entrepreneurship and human capital, business development support and infrastructure, access to finance and incentives, innovation and facilitating technology adoption, and access to market. We also have the CSI product certification by the Bhutan Standards Bureau. We have over 6 or 7 CSI products certified by the Bureau. Then there's marketing support for the CSI products in CSI Fair and Expos. Those could be national and even at regional levels. The Department of Cottage and Small Industry under the Ministry of Economic Affairs, which is again the premier agency for promotion and development of CI sector in the country, has this recognition scheme where 5 entrepreneurs are rewarded and recognized every year. And these recognitions are spread across size and the areas. For example, it's the small scale entrepreneur, the cottage scale entrepreneur, the rural entrepreneur, women entrepreneur, and the service entrepreneurs. So these are in a way to encourage different sizes of CSI and also in different fields. Also not forgetting that for gender equity, there's a dedicated award for Women Entrepreneur of the Year. So all these measures sort of try to mitigate the business development services challenges that our CSI industry has been facing over the years. The special economic zones, we at present have around 2 full-fledged. The Jimina Industrial Estate is in Thimphu, is in west. We have the Pasaka Industrial Estate, one of the oldest, that's in the south. These economic zones, they are outside the customs duty in 1 or 2 aspects. So they rather enjoy certain concessionary rates or exemptions in terms of tax, customs duty and sales tax, so that the industries in this estate and parks would upscale, develop and sustain, and more importantly, as we have seen in the past 2 years, may be able to be resilient to such kind of external shocks. For upcoming, we have the Jimiling Industrial Park, we have the Bondema Industrial Estate, Damdum Industrial Park, Matanga Industrial Park. So these are all upcoming and these are spread across the country. Like we have seen, one of the benefits, the contributions of the CI sector is the regional balanced development. So from that angle, these industrial estate and parks are also regionally distributed across the country. In terms of cluster groups, cooperatives, here our farmers group and cooperatives are facilitated and endorsed and also supported by the Ministry of Agriculture and Forest. The cluster groups and the craft staffs that we have are promoted by the Agency for the Promotion of Indigenous Crafts, the APIC. So we have on record, we have 645 farmers group registered up until now, about 98 cooperatives, 23 cluster groups and 83 craft stalls. The craft stalls are all in Thimphu and has been one of the selling outlets of our indigenous crafts manufactured and produced by our cottage and small industries. On financing, we have various aspects of financing the CSI sector. We had the grants aspects, where entrepreneurs can avail industrial development grant scheme. And in the 9 years of its existence, the scheme has supported over 354 CSIs up to 64 million. We have the Essential Service Scheme and also the Innovation Voucher Scheme. These schemes are spearheaded by, again, the Department of Cottage and Small Industries in partnership with other relevant stakeholders. In terms of loan financing, we have had the Revolving Fund 1 and 2 with the Eastwal Rural Enterprise Development Corporation Limited and the CSI Development Department of the Bhutan Development Bank Limited. Under Revolving Fund 1 and 2, the financing was up to 1 billion that supported around more than 9,000 CSIs. And very recently, in less than 5 years, we have the priority sector lending, where the sectors that are critical to economic diversification, job creation, and improving gender equality were recognized as priority sectors and considered for lending outside the commercial normal terms. So in the past years, we have around 496 million dispersed for 603 CSIs, which were approved of the initially 1,577 who wanted to avail the PSL. This low, rather less than 40% approval rate is more like reinforces the challenges, especially in the fields of human capacity and innovation on the CSI demand side. And then very recently, we also have a dedicated state-owned enterprise bank, the National CSI Development Bank, non-deposit taking bank that caters to the CSI development in the country. In the past 1.5 years of its existence, the bank has approved over 2 billion for 3,763 CSIs in the country. In Mike's presentation, he also touched on the insurance policies for the CSI sector. So two insurance companies in the country, the Royal Insurance Corporation of Bhutan and the Bhutan Insurance Limited, are again our partners in this priority sector lending. The two companies have underwritten over 3,000 insurance policies for a sum assured of over 1 billion. The insurance companies are in a way sharing the risks of the cottage and small industries, as it is. The cottage and small industries come with a rather high risks, and for that reason, they are not able to access the conventional financing. The CSI bank as I was sharing, is a state-owned enterprise bank. It's dedicated to promote the growth of CSI and finances the startups and entrepreneurs. The loan disbursed up until June 2020 was more than 1 billion, and the state finances the CSI Development Bank through issuance of sovereign bonds. The non-deposit bank had an additional equity injection of over 700 million in the past year, so that the bank could on-lend at concessional rates to the entrepreneurs. So as we'll see, the CSI bank did cover the needs of the underserved by the conventional banking. So going forward, one of the activities of this project, this session, could be to see if you could also factor in and then issue green financing bonds, so that the CSI bank could finance green activities that are environment friendly and socially acceptable, or promoting the CSI bank is also a partner of the National Credit Guarantee Scheme, where the projects are guaranteed by another government organization, the National Credit Guarantee Scheme, so that they are able to avail loans financing from the financial institutions. And National CSI Development Bank is a major partner with the Credit Guarantee Scheme. So from the conventional banking financing to various types of financing like grants, and establishing a dedicated SOE for development of CSI sector, We also have microfinance institutions. We have quite a lot. The Tarayana Microfinance Institution is the initiative of the Tarayana Foundation, which is a civil society organization. We have the Renew Microfinance. They respect, educate, nurture, and empower women. That microfinance is also dedicated to empowering the women and girls in Bhutan. It's targeted at improving the quality of life and the status of the vulnerable women and their families, and empower them with the ability of financial freedom. We have the BEWI, the Bhutan Association of Women Entrepreneurs, building microfinance. It also empowers women entrepreneurs in the country. We have the Bhutan Care Credit Limited, which prioritizes entrepreneurs from the agriculture community and spouses of the armed force personnel, youths, and considers them for loans. We have the Microfinance Bhutan Private Limited, which caters to the credit demands of rural population to promote inclusive growth. And these microfinance collectively have loan outstanding of over 300 million. Now, with this kind of access to finance, the microfinance, and especially with the CSI Bank, in the past 5 years or so, the number of loan accounts of the CSIs and the amount has drastically improved over the past 5 years. In 2016, we are looking at barely 3,000 loan accounts of the CSI sector. In 5 years down the line, we have over 2,000 loan holders in the finance through microfinance and the CSI Bank. In terms of value, we are now looking at over 2,500, over 2.5, almost close to 2.5 billion disbursements through these two financings. Well, on the numbers of loan accounts is on the left axis, so it's close to 10,000 loan accounts in 2021, and considering that with 3,000 in 2016 would mean a drastic improvement of over 30%. So, along with the financing institutions like the microfinance and especially the National CSI Development Bank, we have also partnered with the National Credit Guarantee Scheme, which is a counter-cyclical policy response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The NCGS, what it does, it triggers the investment and stimulates economic activities during the pandemic, and this scheme provides guarantees for the repayments of borrowing by the small, cottage, medium and large industries. The CSI share in the guaranteed National Credit Guarantee Scheme loans crosses over 95% in the number of projects and over 64% in value nil terms. The CSI, as an investment trigger mechanism, also has the guarantee effect, the guarantee of projects for 400 million has investment impact over 813 million, and most of these investments are in cottage and small industries. There's about 64% in value and 95% in number of projects. And in addition to the various schemes, the microfinances, the dedicated SOE for CSI financing, and the credit guarantee scheme, we also have the alternative and innovative financing. The crowdfunding, which is an initiative of the Royal Monetary Authority. It's a digital platform developed with the Royal Security Exchange of Bhutan. It aims to provide an alternative financing model for the startups, new business models, and CSIs in the country. The entrepreneurs could pitch their ideas and raise funds from the general public under crowdfunding. Till now, the scheme has raised over 25 million for 6 campaigns of 13 registered projects. We also have the infant financing, which is more of contributions and donations. The crowdfunding is more of your equity investment, where you invest for a stake for equity stake in the businesses. The infant financing, on the other hand, is more of donations and contributions, and the individuals seeking finance in here are mostly the marginalized and economically challenged individuals. These are provided with 15% grant and 80% interest guarantee and collateral-free bridging loan, so that they're able to engage in new investments that's going to make them economically independent and enhance their livelihood. We also have the Japcho, which is borrowed from the concept of angel investors. It's a platform for young Bhutanese entrepreneurs to nurture and grow their business through access to financing. Now, the country has come up with this Japcho, realizing that while young entrepreneurs may have brilliant ideas, they would mostly be faced with the challenge of early startup equity. So the angel investors of our individuals, of the wealthy individuals, could provide financing to these entrepreneurs, and also sort of handhold the young entrepreneurs into developing their business and upscaling it. The investors here are also will also have a stake in the equity ownership of the businesses, of the business ideas pitched there. Now, these initiatives, various institutions are involved in making and supporting this. The Thimphu Tech Park, what it does is it selects does the preliminary selection of the youth groups with potential ideas requiring equity for seed or startup fund. Then we have the BCCI, the Bhutan Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which provides a formal channel to coordinate the participation of investors through registration process. We have the company registrar to offer document and carry out evaluation process, and then also guide on the regulatory framework of the companies. So these are all to supplement the royal government's initiative to promote CSI industry towards economic transformation. Now, with our sort of being a global leader in the environmental conservation, what we could also leverage on is the sustainable financing of green financing projects that are environmentally friendly, and where we can align our financial system with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So for green financing, what we are looking at is establishing a governance and coordination mechanism to establish an effective interagency collaboration across entire ecosystem, maybe incorporate environmental and social risk management while sanctioning credit. That would mean even reviewing the existing loan classification, or maybe even introducing new products to expand the green portfolio. thereby creating a green taxonomy. Now, the promoting green capital would also make our stock exchange more attractive, not only to the domestic investors, but also international investors. Low carbon and climate resilient assets and projects would attract foreign investors that would come with technology know-how and human capacity. So in a way, along with the financing challenge, the international investors would also help with innovation and the human capacity deficiencies that our CSIs are currently facing. Now, along with the enhancing financing for the CSIs, also extending credit guarantees to the entrepreneurs, we also have the fiscal incentives, the fiscal incentives of 27. Most of these are still valid, and we now have the 2020 fiscal incentives. So what the incentives have for the CSI sector is we have the tax exemption and concessionary tax rates for businesses in high priority sectors, including the agriculture and R&R sector, the cooperatives, the creative sectors, and the CSI. The recent fiscal incentive also have investment allowance where our CSI could also participate. Especially it also has tax exemption for CSIs located in rural areas, and for the financial institutions, the incentive of lending to the priority sector comes in the form of tax exemption on the interest income from the professional lending. Also, as one of the contributions of the CSI sector is employment generation, the incentive also sort of rewards the cottage and small industries and also the medium ones for engaging or employing additional Bhutanese national. Then we have the sales and customs duty exemptions for the plant and machinery that our CSI, that our industries would be using in the production process, and the sales tax and customs duty exemptions are also, most of these are also eligible, are also eligible for, are also for the special economic zones and industrial parks. Now, one of the outcomes of this session would be the convergence or aligning of the CSI financing with the entrepreneurial development of the Ministry of Labor and Human Resource. As part of economic recovery and diversification, the Ministry of Labor and Human Resource has launched a skills development program that ensures inclusive and sustainable recovery from socio-economic impact caused by the pandemic. In the first lot, the ministry is targeting about 500 job seekers for skilling and upskilling. And these job seekers are offered around 100 training areas under 9 sectoral classifications. So these would be, the project would be in linkage with the Ministry of Economic Affairs, the BCCA, and the central bank and other financial institutions. So this post-pandemic labor market measure would be one of the avenues where financing could be enhanced for the CSI sector. The job seekers also includes those displaced by the pandemic, especially from the hospitality industry. This measure is particularly looking at financing for startups and growth of business of individuals or groups who, after the after the skilling and upskilling training would be interested and capable in establishing cottage and small industries. On the digital financing, we are yet to have our digital identity. We are looking at Digitalized Bhutan, which is also one of the flagship programs like the CSI sector. There has been tremendous increase in e-business. The central bank is also has a pilot project on the digital currency and digital assets, so that the central bank can invest in digital assets across the border. And with the Industry 4.0.
Hello, Rinchen sir. Hello.
Yes, Lo.
We are running out of time. If you could please speed up the presentation. Thank you.
Just few more slides. So from mechanization to in the first industrial revolution to electrification in second industrial revolution to mass production in third, and then finally we have the big data analytics, which we call the Industry 4.0. So this would be the initial approach of the country would be to establish a governance system, so that while leveraging on the digital platforms, we would also be wary of the consequences, as someone was mentioning in the comments of online businesses and scammers. So that would the digital financing governance in place would also reduce money laundering, etc. And if you look at digital financing over just 2 years, 2019 through 2021, there has been drastic increase in the number of mobile and internet banking. In Q1, we are just looking at around 2 million value, and right now we are looking at over 1 billion transaction in the mobile and internet banking. And we have also recently seen that the Thimphu municipality also lifting the ATM cards. That's because of the decline in the conventional forms of payment, now that people are switching to mobile and internet banking. So as I was saying, the way forward, the path forward for the stakeholders here would be to work together in determining the contributions of CSI to the economy in terms of GDP. Maybe we could also look at financing gap baseline survey. The agencies like the cluster agencies, the cooperatives, the EPIC, we could have established a baseline survey on what is the financing gap of the CSI sector. While they are not eligible in some schemes, it doesn't really mean that they do not need the financing. So we could maybe develop a database on the financing gap of the CSI sector. We could also look at gender disaggregated database for effective policy intervention, so that we are able to improve gender equity, sovereign bonds for green financing and inclusive projects. And then the CSI sectors and the agencies that are promoting the CSI sectors, we could also look at the technical assistance that ESCAP would be willing and would be alive under its circumstances to support the capacity building of the CSI sector and the stakeholders. And finally, all these measures, we are looking at aligning it with the overall post-pandemic recovery actions of the country, so that they are sustainable and also resilient. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rinchen, for the presentation, for highlighting and giving overview sector and challenges of CSI sector in Bhutan. Since we are running out of time, we'd like to encourage the audience to send the questions to the chat box, and we'll move to the next session. Now, I would like to hand over the floor to Ishil.
Thank you, Jit and Rinchen, for your session. And in the interest of time, as suggested by Jit, I would like to request once again for the audience to share your comments, questions to the chat box. And now for the third session, I would like to invite our next moderator, Mr. Amir, Project Director, ESCAP, to take the floor for moderating our last session.
Thank you so much, Yeshi. Sorry, I have to correct. I'm the project coordinator. Yeah, I will be at your service as the moderator of this last session, and I'm very pleased to quickly, as we are running out of time, to quickly introduce you briefly Dr. Mike Troilo, our next speaker, the presenter of this session. The title of this session is The Impact of COVID-19 on MSME Finance and How to Build Back Better. Dr. Mike Troilo is the Chapman Chair of and Professor of International Business and Finance in Collins College of Business at University of Tulsa. At TU, University of Tulsa, Mike teaches a range of finance, economics, and management courses. His research interests focus on the effects of institutions like rule of law on economic development and entrepreneurial activity across countries, particularly in transition economies such as China. He has worked as a consultant for the United Nations, the Asian Development Bank, ADB, the International Labour Organization, ILO, and the Ligatom Institute, a London-based think tank dedicated to poverty eradication. In 2016, he received a Fulbright grant to study economic development in Portugal, and he has published over 50 academic articles, book chapters, and books. Mike has worked in a variety of accounting and finance positions before academy. He was a senior auditor for Arthur Andersen LLP and a cost accountant and pricing analyst for IBM Microelectronics division. He also served as a senior financial analyst for a British company investing in high-tech new ventures and as a controller for an internet startup. He currently advises students who are trying to launch their own firms. Professor Troilo holds a PhD in business economics and international business from the University of Michigan, an MBA and MA in East Asian Studies from the University of Virginia, and BBA in accounting from the College of William and Mary. He is licensed CPA in Virginia. Dr. Troilo, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Amir. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. My purpose here today really is to offer you some food for thought, share with you some best practices. I'm very well aware that when people are labeled as experts, they need to approach these forums with some humility, because those of you in the audience, you certainly know the context of Bhutan better than I do. So what I want to share with you today is some policy suggestions from Asia Pacific, and maybe also some concepts that can stimulate your thinking as to how we can help small and medium enterprises in Bhutan grow and flourish. I'm going to cover three main areas over the next half an hour. First, I briefly just want to set the stage about firm reactions to the pandemic. Then I'm going to move into policies around Asia Pacific that supported MSMEs during the pandemic. And I want to focus on two items that were raised to us speakers from you in the audience as key considerations. One is this idea of credit risk to the CSI sector as a key constraint. And the second is the concentration of financial services in Bhutan. How do we broaden access? So I'll address those before moving on to the third large topic, which is this idea of building back better. And in that, I'll talk about some concepts regarding snapping forward, and then showing you a framework for reconsidering the priorities and purposes of MSME finance, as well as discussing some of the uses of fintech to unlock more access to MSME finance. Last but not least, we'll cover a little bit the Sustainable Development Goals and talk about these environmental, social, and governance considerations and what that's going to look like, with particular regard to empowering female-owned enterprises. Okay, so just very quickly, this is how globally firms basically coped with the pandemic. And I think what you're going to notice among micro, small, medium, reducing unemployment was the most popular choice. For large, it was the second most popular. And then you'll also note for large firms, having people work remotely was the top choice. And then medium, it was second, and for small, it was third. And so in Asia Pacific proper, what do we see? This is as of the first quarter of 2021, and over 60% of firms dealt with the pandemic simply by reducing operating costs. And next most popular was to reduce working hours. You'll see down towards the bottom, the use of fintech or digitalization was not used quite as frequently, just over 20%. Okay, and we'll revisit that when we talk about policy considerations towards the end of my time with you. What about immediate policy measures? So again, I just want to compare and contrast what it looked like globally compared to the region itself. And what you'll notice really is there are basically three big policy measures that were enacted both globally and in Asia Pacific. The most popular was debt finance relief, so helping MSMEs roll over debt, supporting them so they can make loan payments. And the second, second globally and third in Asia Pacific was employment support, keeping people employed so that there wasn't massive unrest due to unemployment. Last but not least was tax relief. And if you add up those three, both for Asia Pacific and for the world, it constitutes about 75 to 80% of the immediate policy measures by expenditure. And the last snapshot I'm going to offer you is just to note some of the differences among different national income levels. So again, the big three still constitute 75 to 80% overall. However, the divisions are different based on the income. So for lower middle and upper middle both, you can see that debt finance was still around 40%. For high income, it was more like a third. For high income, employment support took a bigger share of the pie, again, approximately another third. And then tax relief was much more common for upper middle income countries as well as lower middle income countries compared to the high income. All right, so now let's talk about best practices. And here, I invite you to consider what would be useful and what maybe less so. We are all familiar with the problem of information asymmetry in traditional lending to MSMEs. And so some of what we're going to cover today, it isn't new in the sense that, for example, fintech certainly existed prior to the pandemic. What the pandemic has done is to accelerate some trends, and yes, it has spurred some financial innovations. So one of the best practices in the region is this idea of using credit scoring in order to relieve the problem of information asymmetry between the lender and the loan applicant. We have some innovative companies, Credo Lab and Lendo, both originating from Singapore. Credo Lab is popular in Vietnam and Cambodia. What these companies have done is very clever. They use the cell phone data of entrepreneurs, because almost every entrepreneur does have a cell phone nowadays in order to be connected. They use that data in conjunction with some other sources of information, such as social media activity and character references, to draw up credit scoring for individual entrepreneurs and MSMEs. And this goes a long way to alleviating that information asymmetry. So this is something I think could be useful in Bhutan if it exists. This is an area where perhaps more efforts should be made to think of ways to improve credit scoring and thereby relieve credit risk. which I know is a big problem for the CSI segment in Bhutan, as it is generally in the Asia-Pacific region for MSMEs. The other consideration I would offer, and this is something where your feedback might be helpful. I looked at the Credit Information Bureau of Bhutan. I couldn't ascertain, and I actually asked them directly via chat, how much of their records were digitalized. And this suggestion comes out of my experience in both Cambodia and Vietnam. We'll focus on Cambodia. There's a state-run credit bureau, which is more complete. It has nearly all the records for the adult population in Cambodia. However, a lot of that data is not useful because it's on paper. In contrast, that state-run credit bureau has a private credit bureau that it's competing against. The private credit bureau doesn't have quite the depth of coverage of the population. However, almost all the records are digitized, which gives them a great advantage in terms of efficiency and speed in opening more loans for the MSME sector. So to the extent to which that process of digitization could be increased in the Credit Information Bureau of Bhutan, that also would go a long way to alleviating information asymmetry and reducing credit risk. Now I'd like to turn to the second major conundrum, and this is broadening access to finance. Again, what Bhutan is experiencing is shared by other nations in the region. It stands to reason that when we talk about brick and mortar banking, most of that's going to be found in the areas of highest population density. So rural entrepreneurs generally are left out. And I looked at the Royal Monetary Authority of Bhutan and found there that this mobile app, MBOB, it already has 380,000 users, approximately 44% of the population, and that was as of last March. So this is another great way, because when we think about it as policymakers, it really isn't cost effective to have brick and mortar banking in the rural areas of most countries. That's even true in the United States. This has long been an issue for policymakers who want to spur economic development. And so mobile banking is the solution. I know Bhutan is well underway with that, but this is an area, again, where more resources would pay fruitful dividends. The second area, and this is something that, according to the World Bank, Bhutan has been doing much better, but a best practice in the region is simply registering SMEs. I know from my work with Lao PDR that this is a big problem for them. Their informal sector is still very large. And in order to help their MSME sector get the financing that they need, they first, of course, need to know where they are and who they are. So fortunately, Bhutan, especially in the past 7 years from my research, has done a great job of getting those on board. So congratulations on work well done. The third area that constitutes a best practice for broadening access to finance is with regard to equity markets. Now, of course, when we speak of accessing equity, we're really not talking about a broad base of MSMEs. Few SMEs, literally probably the top 5%, have the skills required to access equity. However, for high-tech startups, and I was pleased to see that there's crowdfunding and other things happening in Bhutan, but for these top-level high-tech startups, maybe some more incentives can be offered. So, for example, Lao PDR has capital market literacy. In addition to basic financial literacy, such as preparing financial statements and accounting and bookkeeping, Lao PDR actually offers classes in equity markets, the kinds of disclosures that it takes to list on an equity market, the ongoing financial reporting that's required, etc. They also offer very handsome and attractive tax incentives, such as 5-year tax holidays for MSMEs to list on their stock exchange. Another route that may be a possibility is to have separate exchanges. I know there's the Royal Securities Exchange in Bhutan. Again, I looked it up. I believe there are 19 companies listed now. But in order to encourage more listing by small firms, Singapore has their main board, and they also have a specialized SME exchange called Catalyst. So that's something that could be considered as a means whereby SMEs can access equity financing. Now I want to turn from best practice to thinking about the future, and this is how I'll spend the remainder of the talk. So the first concept to grasp, and this is not about specific policies so much as, again, stimulating your creativity, giving you some things to think about, is the idea that whatever happens going forward, and no one knows, of course, what that will be, the future will not look like the past. We are not going to return to the way things were before the pandemic. We don't know what all those changes will involve, what constitutes the new normal. The ripple effects of the pandemic are still being felt. Some recoveries may not recover at all, or they may recover slowly. Others may be enhanced. For example, if we consider online retailing, those companies were benefited by the pandemic. And so sorting out, who are the winners and who are the losers, that's still going to happen. But we all need to get our minds around the fact that things will not be the way they were before. And I think for us as policymakers, that means we have to, it creates more of a burden for us. We have to kind of track all the things that are going on with fintech, and we have to be facilitators to the MSME sector and explain to them what these possibilities are. And that really is my next point. Obviously, the pandemic was horrific in terms of lives lost and the economic devastation that occurred. But as we move forward, we should try to grasp opportunities, and I'll be talking more about that when I cover fintech and digitalization. And the last is this idea of new avenues. As I said, there are many things such as fintech that predate the pandemic, and so that's why I put new in quotes. Some of these trends will be accelerated because of the pandemic, and then there are other things that will be truly novel. What do I mean by that? I mean that whereas before businesses, whether large and small alike, would have to shop among different providers to find things as varied as tax services, consulting services, and loans, we are entering a brave new world where a lot of these services will be bundled together. Really what's key now is mastery of information and data. And so banks who are used to the traditional way of doing things are going to find themselves competing against some hungry rivals who are indeed proficient at turning information into financing. Now that's something, again, that we as policymakers want to pay keen attention to for the sake of the CSI segment. So again, just sticking briefly with the theoretical, Masato, Nick, and I devised this framework that's based on the Japanese idea of ikigai. So ikigai is a way for a person to maintain harmony in his or her life, balancing what one is good at with what the world needs, with what one can get paid for. We adapted this concept to MSME finance, and I'm not going to read the whole paradigm for you. I'm just going to call attention to these four major circles. So what we're envisioning in this brave new world that we're entering is what the private sector is good at, innovation, and increasingly the private sector will have to pay attention to economic or environmental, social, and governance goals. What the new normal will entail, there will be a demand for both innovation and support. Now, what the government is tasked with doing, traditionally, the government has always been a regulator, and it has also added support of the MSME sector to regulation. The government is actually going to have to move beyond that. So we as policymakers are going to, again, have to be very attuned to innovations going on in the private sector that can broaden access to finance. And we're also going to have to be conduits of information regarding the sustainable development goals, the environmental, social, and governance issues that are increasingly coming to the fore, because that's what the society as a whole, what the Commonwealth needs and desires from all sectors of the economy going forward. So I just want to spend the next couple of slides in talking a little bit more concretely about some of these. As I mentioned, banks are going to find themselves in increasing competition. We heard about the examples of Credo Lab and Lendo. What did they do? They turned phone data into credit scoring. And so now the availability of credit will depend increasingly on a company's ability to master and use data. So previously unrelated industries, unrelated to financial services, that is, people like Amazon, Google, any telecom provider, these firms are going to be able to offer a suite or a portfolio of different services to small businesses. This is great news for small businesses. Again, this is going to open up myriad channels of finance. However, it poses a challenge again for us policymakers to keep abreast of what these changes are, but it really poses a threat to traditional banking. We're all familiar with the model of traditional banking, whereby a bank would demand that a loan applicant furnish certain information and perhaps collateral in order to get a loan. If a small business was not able to comply, then that small business went without finance. Over time, of course, that changed. There are non-financial or non-banking financial institutions, micro-lending, etc., to alleviate some of these problems. But this traditional way, which was the way prior to the pandemic, is increasingly going to become obsolete. And so what small business owners are going to enjoy then is, again, a range of services, not just traditional lending, but also things like wealth management, trade finance, access to foreign exchange, access to insurance, and myriad other financial services. This, again, great news for small business owners. This will be very convenient for them, less costly as a result of reduction of transactions costs, but again, a strange new environment or ecosystem in which to operate. And so fintech, we're all familiar with it. It can encompass so many different things: crowdfunding, P2P, artificial intelligence, big data, etc. And so we already talked, I think, a bit about how this can be used to reduce information asymmetry. So I won't go over that again. Obviously, by making this process more efficient, it will help with extending greater quantities of credit to the CSI sector. And then there's also the important element that as a result of using this data and information to process credit scores to acquire loans, transactions costs for users, i.e. small business owners, should decrease. So if we can imagine, right, with a mobile banking app, a small business owner need only apply for a loan via the app. He or she won't have to pay a loan application fee. There will be a number of providers vying for this business. And so it will be insignificant, really, in terms of time and money for MSME owners to access increasing amounts of capital. Now, I'm not suggesting that the traditional way will disappear all at once. There will be a rather extended transition. How long, no one can say. But I do think that fintech is here to stay and is something that we need to grasp. And so the other benefit is not just obviously for small business owners, but with digitalization, with the use of fintech, that should mean greater transparency for all stakeholders. For example, the governments in several Southeast Asian nations can use, fintech for seeing where financial support is being directed, what sectors, what applicants, and also fintech is useful for tax compliance as well, which is a big issue for a number of countries in the region. Probably the best way that we as policymakers can add value is to hold awareness campaigns as well as skill enhancement workshops. It's very easy for us when we get close to this information, perhaps to overestimate how much awareness that small business owners have. And so the way that we can most help them, I think, is to keep them abreast of these dizzying changes and explain what the benefits are. And so That will take some work, obviously, on our part, but it's probably the best way. It's been the most effective way that governments in the region have done it. And I noted from the last presentation that there are 100 training centers open in Bhutan, which is a great step in the right direction. And the last thing I want to leave you with on this topic is this enabling function. Some examples, Lufax in China, which is a P2P lending platform, which has done wonders really for female empowerment in China. Use of P2P lending has been shown to be useful in reducing the gender gap in lending between male and female entrepreneurs. Keo Global, which is this cloud-based business services platform, again, kind of hearkening to the future where there is a bundle or portfolio of different services like tax and consulting that are easily available to small business owners in Vietnam. And then I threw in a US example. This is similar to Lendo and Credo Lab, so I'm not going to belabor that one any further. I now want to talk about really the last big topic that we have, this idea of addressing sustainable development goals. And I'm just showing you this matrix briefly so you can see some of the germane areas, the targeted SDG and how it fits in with the MSME sector. Some are quite obvious, no poverty, gender equality, decent work, and economic growth. I'm not going to go into too much detail, just to emphasize the point that there are a number of ways where this issue of building back better will involve the MSME sector. And we've really only scratched the surface here. So in the research that Masato, Nick, and I have done regarding the Asia Pacific region, we find that indeed governments are already thinking about ways to build back better. They are considering the environment and social inclusion and governance. However, most of these projects are aimed towards infrastructure. This stands to reason. I mean, it's kind of I guess you'd call it the low-hanging fruit. So these governments are obviously busy. They just haven't had the chance yet to really focus more neatly on MSMEs. And so I think there's a great opportunity here for us as policymakers to add value. Part of it, I think, is a change in mindset for small business owners and for us. Oftentimes, complying with environmental social governance can be seen as a burden or a cost. And indeed, I'm not going to pretend that it's always advantageous for a firm to comply. But if we start seeing this as a source of competitive advantage, I think we can really open the door to more access to finance. This is already underway, as I'm sure you're aware. So in an academic study done during the pandemic and just after, resiliency. So firms that are already embracing these ESG principles, they tended to survive at much higher rates than those that did not. It also tends to be the case that investors and financial institutions prefer ESG firms because they see them as less risky. They figure that adhering to these ESG principles is a sign of strong management, and so they prefer them. We also need to consider the fact that with regard to trade finance and global supply chains, MSMEs that adhere to ESG, that embrace it, are going to be more attractive. So large firms want partners who don't pose any risk to them, any vulnerability. And so again, when they encounter MSMEs who are embracing these ESG principles, they see them as more worthy partners than MSMEs who have not yet embraced them. Last but certainly not least, governments are now requiring, new disclosures around ESG, and also requiring at least some adherence to access financing. So this is just an illustration of some of these considerations in the region. So for India, I just took the example of their stewardship code, which applies to firms that are listing on their Securities and Exchange Board, and it's all about monitoring all aspects of ESG. New Zealand, the focus is more nearly on environmental risks. So firms are now required to register a climate risk report. In Korea, the focus is on corporate governance. And this is kind of a neat arrangement that shows us what's possible. So here the Korea Securities Exchange and their National Pension Service drew up these guidelines for investing in domestic stocks. The National Pension Service wanted to be on board with ESG, and so they volunteered to do this. So the two entities created these guidelines for domestic stock investment to improve corporate governance. Last but not least, we see Thailand there. They created this ESG platform, information platform, and that promotes the use of ESG bonds. I know Rinchen referred to that, green bonds in his earlier presentation, as well as ESG disclosure for companies that want to list on their Securities and Exchange. All right, so the last aspect of this that I wanted to speak about was regarding female empowerment, female entrepreneurship. And I know there are at least 4 or 5 different groups represented in the audience whose focus in Bhutan is indeed female empowerment. I'm just showing you a very brief summary. I think we all know the tale that this gender gap exists. This shows you a snapshot of what happened during the pandemic. The stridency refers to measures of government, so lockdowns and things of that sort. The most stringent is that quartile 4, and you can see there's a noticeable gap, 40% of female-led closed compared to only 30% among male-owned. And the next most stringent was 35% versus 23%. So I'm not going to belabor that any further. I think we're all well aware of the story. What do we do to make things better? So one idea, and again, this is something that predates the pandemic, but is starting to get more traction, is this concept of gender budgeting. And it can happen at both the national and local level to increase social inclusion, specifically female empowerment. This is something that may be useful in Bhutan as it has been elsewhere in terms of setting development efforts. So for example, an MSME development agency, part of their budget may be determined based on outcomes for female entrepreneurs. So at least 75% of the female entrepreneurs that apply to that agency for financial support had to receive support in order to unlock a portion of that agency's budget. And so obviously there can be issues with this. There's no policy that's completely without cost or completely flawless. You can imagine a perverse incentive perhaps where such a development agency may be tempted to fudge or pass along non-qualified people just to make their quota. But again, overall, it seems that the benefits outweigh the costs of this kind of policy, and it is being used to great effect around the region. And so the last thing is this gender finance. This is more about bank account ownership. And again, we're well aware that there are these discrepancies. So I'm going to move on to how can we address this? We know, for example, that many female entrepreneurs, especially in rural areas, they have no access to formal banking, no experience with it. And now, of course, we know about the availability of mobile banking. So this is an area then that might deserve greater focus. We know that it can be useful. It's now a matter of applying perhaps more will, more resources to spread it more widely, especially in rural areas among the female unbanked, so that they can partake in economic development. Another big consideration too is more fundamental, and that regards the laws and customs of a nation. So to the extent that reforms need to be made so that women can own assets such as land, that would also be most helpful, because obviously one severe handicap for women is the inability to possess collateral, right? Property that can be used for collateral. All right, so let's wrap up. So just a few things I want you to keep in mind as we go away, and that is that Fintech is not magic, right? It certainly can be, the potential is vast, and we really haven't tapped all of it yet. We're really just getting started. but we shouldn't imagine that it's going to solve all problems. It may even create some problems. And indeed, it's not going to happen overnight. Traditional banking is not just going to disappear. There will be some kind of ongoing transition, who knows how long, from more traditional means of access to finance to greater use of financial technology. I also think it's important for us to, it's always been important to have discussions with stakeholders, but now in this post-pandemic world, I think it's more important than ever. I showed you that Ikigai framework to kind of to underline, highlight just how important this dialogue needs to be. It needs to be much more robust. So the private sector obviously needs to be aware of what the government's doing, needs to be aware of what society is demanding. And likewise, we who are policymakers, we need to be keeping abreast of what's going on in the private sector, what the evolving needs of our constituencies are for society as a whole. And last, I would just say that ESG is certainly here to stay. Not many, if we look at the overall population of the CSI segment, perhaps not many firms have yet adapted or adopted ESG principles. But I think the demand for firms to comply with ESG and take it seriously will only increase in the future. And the best way we can add value here as policymakers is to educate MSMEs and to be that conduit of information that they need, explaining to them what the latest and greatest changes are and communicating to them how best they can adapt them for their businesses. I thank you very much for your attention, and if there's any time, Amir, you can tell me. I can try to answer questions, or I can answer them via writing.
Thank you so much, Mike, for your very informative and comprehensive presentation. Listening to your presentation, especially that very interesting slide on Ikigai of MSME financing framework, I think from the systems management perspective, we all agree that supporting MSME financing needs really more institutionalized coordination and lots of communication, collaboration, networking, and as you said on your last slide, really very, very good relationship between the government and private sector, various banking and non-banking service providers involved with MSME financing in our countries. So thanks again for your very, very insightful presentation. And I'm not sure if you have time to open the floor for the participants to share with us any questions or maybe last comments. Already we had some comments, not really questions, but yeah, I see one raised hand. Maybe we can take one question, please.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Mike. It was really informative and eye-opening. I have few questions and for you, which I hope you are in place to answer it. Now I would like to touch on the stock market, but on the equity market. Now, okay. For now, what we have to do is it's a lengthy process, and I feel as an entrepreneur, the spirit, the ideas doesn't keep exploding for years, and when it does, I feel it must be supported well. So, likewise in Bhutan, for us to enter the IPO market, first we have to register ourselves as private limited for 3 years, and upon showing our 3 years audited accounts and certain procedures, then only we are eligible for IPO. On that, I'm not saying wrong, but I feel that is quite a lengthy time for aspiring entrepreneurs, especially for the ones who doesn't have money and who has brilliant ideas. With such policy, I don't think they can penetrate the IPO market. And for this, I would like to know how things are happening in the developed, advanced nations, And
okay.
The second thing,
that's a great question. I can answer it briefly. I agree with you. 3 years is a long time. Certainly I could even contrast it with other countries in the region. Usually I've heard like Singapore, Cambodia, Laos, they try to make it 1 year to 2 years at the most, maybe 18 months, whereby they have intensive training in the kinds of disclosures that are going to be necessary. So yes, I think that's an area that policymakers should be looking to try to truncate that time, because that's an extremely long time, especially in the high tech sector, to wait for an IPO to list.
Yeah, I see. Even I feel the same, that there could be an alternative where regulators do more homework and where to validate that the entrepreneur is diligent. There could be a lot of way to do due diligence and all. Likewise, the other question is on the building public infrastructure. Bhutan is a small market for private individuals, and we have big opportunities to build public infrastructures. So now what is happening is our government keeps on managing the money from outside and keeps on planning themselves. However, during the process of procurement, the qualities are compromised, and at the end, the end users are not being able to enjoy what is being provided. So I would like to know how private individuals gets to participate in public infrastructure development. That is another question. And
right.
The other one, as you, maybe.
Okay, I think I got the substance of it. You faded a bit, but the question is about how can private individuals participate in these public procurement? And again, I guess I'll draw on my experience.
Development.
Yeah.
Public infrastructure development, like
infrastructure.
For now, we have public-private PPP policies in place. But I feel there could be a lot of policies that can enhance and bridge between the public and the private, where our government need not have to borrow money or look for money from outside. Maybe arrange the IPO market, strengthen the IPO market, and let the private individuals develop the public infrastructure, where there could be a lot of frameworks which can benefit the entire users, the government, and the private sector.
Okay. I mean, I know, and I'll be very brief. I know from my experience in Vietnam, they were very rigorous in having these set-asides for infrastructure projects where they would involve a certain number of small, medium enterprises. So they would make sure that they took bids and set aside at least like 20 to 30% of the entire contract for things that they knew that even small, medium enterprises could do, like make cement, for example, or make steel rods, or different things that didn't that weren't beyond the skill sets of the SMEs involved. So I think it's a matter of execution. I mean, I think governments know what to do to help that process. They need to have these written regulations that set aside a certain amount of these infrastructure and other public works for SMEs. But then it's a matter of executing that and making sure that that stipulated amount is really going to the CSI sector.
Okay, thank you so much. And the last question, what I have noticed from the banking sector in Bhutan, I don't have much financial background, and but as we witness how banks prioritize who to give loan and how to give loan, it's quite saddening for the private individuals, especially the aspiring entrepreneurs, because maybe in 15 years down the line, we must have invested billions of dollars to which was given as a credit to the landowners to build a home. I mean the commercial buildings, But in the meantime, when we have a budget, do you think it's important to maybe do some analytical study on who to prioritize first with the limited money, whether to build house or whether to build the economy through the SMEs, MSMEs?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's an excellent question. I know Cambodia is doing something like that in order to allocate scarce resources, and of course they're still developing too. They do have tools to do exactly what you suggest, whereby at the national government level and at some of the local levels too, they have what we'll call it an algorithm, whereby they say, okay, well, we have this much budget to spend And right now, SME sector is the priority. So this year, they're going to get a greater share as opposed to some other public goods such as affordable housing. So that is already being practiced by some of the governments in the region. And yes, I think it's important to make data informed decision, maybe not data driven, because there'll be other considerations, but certainly data informed decisions about how to allocate these resources.
Okay, thank you so much, Mike. I can see Nick also has raised his hand. Please, Nick.
Nick? Okay.
Okay, maybe we can take also a question from chat box, yeah? This last question maybe. Okay.
Maybe this question on digital financing, and it's how well suited is it for Bhutan considering its high volatility?
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm sorry, what's the question? Is it directed towards me then?
Yes, the question is, digital financing is highly volatile. How is it recommended for Bhutan right now?
Right now. Well, I think the catch there is right now, right? So I see it as a transition. I don't see it as, suddenly there's going to be a switch that's flipped. So is the pace appropriate in Bhutan in this transition from traditional banking to digital banking? I have to admit, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure that it's appropriate. I think that certainly there are some things that I saw in the chat, like cryptocurrency, and there are some aspects of fintech that I think it would make sense for a country like Bhutan to hold off on, and maybe use of digital currency might be one of them. But other forms of digital banking, they're here, such as mobile banking apps, and I think those could be rolled out relatively safely. So there is experience with the MBOB app, and in my way of thinking, it would make sense for the government of Bhutan to perhaps devote more resources to making that app more widely available, especially, as I said, to address the concern about the gender gap between male and female entrepreneurs.
Thank you very much, Mike. I think we can, because we are running out of time, but I can see again Nick's raised hand. Please, Nick.
Thanks, Amir. Just very quickly, in some ways, IPOs are not the best ways to raise money. IPOs are typically a secondary market by which shares are traded. So they support the raising of money because then people can buy and sell as their moods change. But really, in order to raise money, you don't use an IPO, and you probably would be poorly advised to raise money on an official market within 3 years. You'd be better off using an OTC market, over-the-counter market, and even better than that, raising money through private equity or venture capital, and you build up from there. It's only then when they're trying to exit from the investment down the road that you would think of an IPO. So the IPO is not the end all of all. It's actually it is the end all. It's not the start all. So be careful what you expect of an IPO.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, thank you so much, Nick, for the comment. I think we have Professor Yoshino also with us, and he wants to give some comments, maybe. Please, Professor Yoshino. Professor Yoshino? We cannot hear Professor, but I got the message from Yeshi and also raised hand from Professor Yoshino that he wants to contribute with some comments. Okay, maybe we can hand it over now to Yeshi to continue the program. Thanks again, Mike. And if we can get Dr. Yoshino back, we can also, yeah, before closing, I'm not sure, but thanks again, Professor Mike Troilo, for very, very informative and very interactive session we had as last session of today. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeshi, please.
Thank you, Amir and Mike, for your great session. And I think some issue with the professor's mic or something we are not able to hear. And actually, Professor Yoshino Sensei is the professor of Emirate of Kyoto University of Japan, and he's also a director of the Financial Research Center of the Japan government. And he's there in the board for almost 2 decades plus in the Japan Communist Bond Committee, and he is the advisor to the Japan government. And he's also a visiting professor for the Grips University. I'm in the National Institute of National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies and University of Tokyo. So, Professor, can you hear me? Or if you could speak out instead of your presentation, or if you just make your comment, summarize, your comments through instead of your presentation. Or something with your mic or your headphone. I think your computer might have in the mute mode. Okay, in the meantime, I would like to make one earnest request to all the participants and all the our colleagues here, those who are present for today's in this session, and thank you for making your active participation and all those things. And before we get directly into the closing session, I would like to request every one of you to please kindly take a few minutes to evaluate our today workshops, which is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the ESCAP has already shared the links for the evaluation last time itself, and also I've requested them to send it tomorrow as a reminder. So if you take some time to finish up, and if you could not able to speak out today, and if you could remember from today's session, if you could give some constructive comment or suggestion, although we could not cover up all this what you are concerned today, I think they will come up in their final documents as a kind of policy advice to our government for future consideration. So with this, I think that we can't take it. Yoshino Sensei, I think he has some issue with this technical thing. And so for the interest of time now, I would like to invite Mr. Viravin Su from the Associate Economic Officer for Financing for Development Section, Macro Policy and Financing Development Division, ESCAP, for your closing remarks.
Hi, thank you. So on behalf of ESCAP, thank you to the speakers today for your fantastic presentations. We really appreciate it. And just to recap some of the brief takeaways, we've heard a lot about the unique challenges that MSMEs or cottage and small industries face in Bhutan, particularly during COVID-19. There are various solutions to foster a favorable ecosystem for financial inclusion and sustainability in Bhutan through enhancing the resilience of MSMEs in Bhutan. This is also important because we understand that importance because a large proportion of the workforce work for MSMEs. There are other challenges that we've noted from the various comments and interventions that include things like marketing in addition to financing. So we are happy that everyone has joined here today to discuss solutions, to discuss ways forward in ways such as MSME clustering to offer products both domestically and internationally. We've also highlighted the fact that MSMEs are critical to the development of economies, and that one of the main themes of our discussion today has been information asymmetry and financial literacy. We've talked about very many creative solutions, such as partnering MSMEs with the information that they share with e-commerce platforms or other business partners, and having that be a role in closing the information gap with lenders as well. But also, after all is said and done, we need a mindset change, right? There's a lot that fintech can do and can offer us, both in the forms that is currently available, like mobile banking, and the forms that are farther away that may require greater levels of financial literacy. That is a slower development process to getting there. Traditional banks do not need to be threatened. They can pivot and find a space to support MSME financing. The cost structure that has made it possible for microfinance institutions to create a niche and a business model to lending to MSMEs is critical, but traditional banks can also participate in that space as well. And getting that motivation for traditional banks will require work from both our stakeholders and also policymakers. We've talked about the National CSI Development Bank, and we've talked about financial microfinance institutions and the technical assistance that they can provide. So after everything that we've covered today, we can clearly see it'll take immense cooperation from all parties to truly close the financing gap. And we as ESCAP continue to be ready to support our member states in economic development, MSME financing, and the implementation of digital finance. It will take time, and we must keep in mind the pace of transition to digital finance. As Mike has said in the very last session, that there are some aspects that are well suited for developing countries and some aspects of digital finance that will need greater levels of financial literacy. Obviously, things like cryptocurrency, things like IPOs, these are potential ways to raise more money, but we must always keep in mind how well suited these financial tools will be for Bhutan itself. So in conclusion, on behalf of ESCAP, I'd like to thank the ministry and to our presenters and everyone who joined here today for participating in this wonderful workshop. And we hope that you've gained some valuable and useful lessons and tools moving forward. And just as a side note, again, we'd like to ask that you help complete the evaluation form as well. And so on behalf of ESCAP, thank you, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Vara, for your very great conclusion or concluding remarks. Now, as scheduled in our program, I take this opportunity to thank all the distinguished participants, presenters, and the co-partners or co-sponsors from the ESCAP for your wonderful and unwavering support for coming up this successful events. So just to summarize today's sessions, so presenters three of the presenters have covered all the challenges, constraints, some of the recommendations going forward, and all those things based on the lesson that have existed before the pandemic and during the pandemic. So although we fully understand the COVID-19 has brought so many disruptive in the global level, but it also brought some of the gave the key opportunity. I mean, dividend out of this this COVID-19 is now it gave all the policy maker or thinker to think in a better way for how to tackle the issues going forward to move forward for our developing our countries. So the presenter has touched upon, besides others, conventional financing access for the MSME. They have also touched upon the kind of credit ratings for the SME that will enable for the access of accessing the financing for MSME. Then the gender budgetings for the SMEC or CSI business purpose. Then innovative financing in terms of green financing and also through ESG principal financing. Then the last and final is through the digitizations like crypto and all those things. So with that, and also I would like to take stock of the government our Bhutan government has done so far, like establishing the National CSI Development Bank, National Guarantee Scheme, giving the exemption in the fiscal exemptions. All those things are there, and not that when we speak out of the National CSI Bank, it's not that only this particular bank is giving the access to the SME or CSI financing, but all the financial institutions are equally playing a big role in taking for financing for the MSME financing. So with that, I would like to bring the this event formal end, and thank you once again for participating very actively and very intelligently. So thank you once again, and touch daily for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amir. Take good care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, all participants. Special thanks to Yeshi, Rinchen, all colleagues from Bhutan.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Amir, and all those things. Thank you for everyone.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.